if you're ready, I'll go ahead and ask you some of those questions that I sent over to you.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Roy, what were the reasons behind the creation of Cornerstone Work and Worldview Institute?
The first reason is seek first Christ's kingdom. Simple, but it's true. The world of work, business world, and education have, in many respects, lost sight of Christ's kingdom, and we don't tend to think in those terms. But bringing those back into the conversation, into the discussion, is really important, especially when you think about the fact that roughly only about 20% at best of Christian kids attend any form of Christian higher education. That means like 80% of the kids, are not receiving advanced Christian education. Some just simply go into the workplace, but probably about 60% are headed to secular government schools for career and job training. And that seems to me to be the greatest threat long-term to the church, because we're not thinking about how the next generation is being raised up for all vocations, for all of life. And we need to think about that 60 or so percent who are not getting a Christian worldview on the fields of interest they have, the professions they want to pursue, and so on. I think the initial reason was really wanting to have something that oriented students to the workplace and gave them a Christian worldview on top of that. But I think the deeper worldview issue is, secular schools produce secular students. You're being steeped in secularism at a secular institution, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about carpentry or plumbing or nuclear physics. There is a underlying worldview that is part of the package. On top of that, state schools generally do a poor job of preparing students for the marketplace. They speak to it a lot, they hope to do it a lot, but they really lack the values and worldview to prepare students for life and to have an ethic about work and the passion for the jobs we do. They just don't have that depth for a robust work life. And the Christian does. The Christian is created to work. The Christian has been gifted by God, who is the creator of all things, to be ourselves creative and industrious. And that changes the equation about how we should be looking at work. And so I think when we look at the issue of work, we have to say, let's get a Christian vision of it. Let's seek first Christ's kingdom with regard to work, and realize that the vision that we have for what it means to prepare the next generation of Christian student is really to prepare them for the whole of life, not just a job, and to have them really be rooted in the belief that everything they do or say, and sort of the Kuyperian vision of, isn't a square inch of all that exists, that Christ doesn't claim it's mine. And that means every job they do, every task they perform should be done to the glory of God, should be done for the advancement of Christ's kingdom. And that's what the Institute really is designed to encourage and instill in students.
Okay, that's great. When you were developing the Institute, what did you see that it would be able to provide that is unique and different?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is that there's no shortage of academic institutions that will try to provide vocational training of some sort, either at a very low level or a very advanced level. There's lots of those out there. But there's a disconnect between that and the workplace. And just as I think Christians need to lead in education and not simply follow the statist vision, Christians also need to lead in business and the workplace, and not just secularists. So part of the challenge here is, I think, encouraging a reformation of business with a Christian worldview, so that Christian business owners and those who are in Christian organizations looking for good employees don't just say, oh, I guess have to go look at the university, the local university, to find qualified people. They need to raise up the next generation themselves. They need to not abdicate that responsibility to the state, but they need to think, how can I help encourage Christians in the church today to be prepared to be the workers and leaders of tomorrow? How do I, as a business owner, an organizational leader, how do I help stimulate that? And I think what's unique about the Institute is that we really have tried to make it a partnership between business and organizations and students, so that we're working together in the context where the work is actually done. When I taught at a state university, I was always amazed at the disconnect here. You would have students studying to do something, and then they may or may not go out and get an internship, and then they would graduate, and then they'd look for a job. And always the complaint was, the students don't have any experience. They don't have any connection to the actual job that they had hoped to study. And that was true. We just didn't do a good job of that linkage. And I think Christian business owners especially are really patently aware of the limitations of that system, where they hire people who have credentials, in the field of the need, but they don't bring experience, they don't bring a Christian worldview, and they are immediately troubled by having people that are just inadequately prepared to do the kind of work that they need done in their business or organization. So bringing the businesses together with the Training Institute means that we're really partners in the same process. We're helping facilitate, to a degree, the training in conjunction with the businesses and organizations, so that they help guide that development of the person. And if you already are beginning with a Christian worldview, you're already halfway, down the road, because you've got ethics and work ethic that is already more robust than the typical unbeliever. And you're going to be hopefully gaining increased knowledge and skill and experience through that Christian business. And they have a foot in the door. They have skin in the game, because they want to raise up that next generation themselves, so that they have quality workers. So it really is this partnership between business, industry organizations, and the training process that really is unique and very, very important.
Okay. What do you think the future of Christian education looks like? What do you see as being the models that will be successful in the future?
Well, I am neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, so my forecasts of the future need to be, asterisked with that note. I think Christian higher education in the United States, I can speak to some of it elsewhere in the world, but the big problem globally, as in the United States, is the state control of higher education, and that has afflicted Christian higher education as well. You've got accreditation issues, you've got state government mandates with regard to all forms of higher education, and so on. And so what is unique about Christian higher education is often no longer unique. It's often sort of secular education with a Bible verse or a prayer tacked on top of it. So I think the trouble that we face is a diminished, distinctively Christian higher education. And we continue to follow the same models that the statists have worked on. I mean, if you think think about it, all the state universities that are out there, they spend millions, if not billions of dollars every year to shore up the secular state university system. And it's not a good system. Students are leaving universities without a good education. Well, that's sort of being taken as the norm, and everybody who does other forms of higher education are sort of forced to follow the norm of the state university. That's considered the gold standard. It's not, but that's what they're forcing through state regulations and accreditation to be the norm. You know, so you have all of the diversity requirements, and you have you know, credential requirements and all these things, and they're not looking at characters or character of the teachers, or the morality or the discipline of the students, or the spiritual health of these things, and that puts pressure on Christian institutions. So Christian institutions are in a very challenging environment. They've always been, but it's more, the antithesis between belief and unbelief is more stark, and it's becoming harder and harder to combat because of the pressures that are brought to bear by the state. So if I look at Christian higher education 30 years ago, there were a lot of pretty robust Christian colleges and universities around the world. And today, that's just not the case. There's so many points at which they have been compromised by feminism, the sexual revolution, you know, all kinds of things, and they become dependent on federal money through the federal financial aid process. Almost all of the Christian colleges in the Council of Christian Colleges and Universities are taking federal money, and if you pull that money out because you violate their rules, they're going to suffer probably catastrophic failure. I was at a meeting of college presidents now a number of years ago, but because my former institution did not take federal financial aid, they all kind of laughed at me and sort of said, well, that's sort of a silly thing to do. Why are you doing that? And it wasn't, I think it was like within 2 years, they were saying they should have been doing what we were doing. They should have gotten away from that, because the federal government came in and said, well, if you take federal money, therefore you must follow these things. You know, you must follow our social agenda. And it was with accreditation, it was with federal financial aid. Those were the two big, you know, channels which were infiltrating Christian higher education's operations. And it just was really disastrous. And so they were talking about some of the biggest Christian affiliated universities in the country were talking about quitting federal financial aid. That was stunning, because there are always strings attached. So I don't know where it's going to go, but I know that if they do not get some of those things right, they're not going to be distinctively Christian, or they're not going to be around. It's going to be one of the two, and it's not going to be pretty. And so institutions like Cornerstone, that doesn't take federal financial aid, is not interested in playing in that game, is more principled, is more theologically, religiously focused on, again, it's about the kingdom, stupid. You get focused on that. Those other things, you know, really are secondary, tertiary, or utterly irrelevant. You just aren't afflicted by them in the same way. It's not to say there's not still a fight through state regulations and so on, but I think it's going to be those institutions that stand on high principle and work around those pressures, avoiding those pressures, that will survive, and those that don't won't be worth attending.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like that's true with a lot of the schools that, you know, you hear about that are standing up and making a stand. They are tending to be the ones that are seeing increased enrollment, while others are seeing decreased enrollment.
Yeah, I might also point out is that the cost of Christian higher education has followed the same trajectory as everybody else. I mean, costs have gone up, and part of the problem is accreditation is extremely expensive. It costs probably a minimum of $20,000 a year to maintain accreditation. Well, if you're a small liberal arts college, that's a gigantic chunk of change. That drives up your tuition. So federal financial aid has done nothing to help in that regard. It's just inflated everything. Accreditation is expensive. And then we also have the credential game. I think what the universities ended up doing helped, 30, 50 years ago. But what we now have is, for example, state schools, secular schools, saying all of our teachers must have master's degrees. Well, all you did was inflate degrees now. So what used to be a bachelor's degree is now a master's degree. What used to be, a master's degree is now a PhD. So everybody has these advanced credentials. And it's really a society that has lost the foundations of excellence and the integrity of learning and knowledge. So when you don't trust anybody, when you can't trust them, you need the credential to prove that you're trustworthy. So I have my certificate. I'm a good teacher because I have my certificate. Doesn't mean you're a good teacher, right? Doesn't mean at all. I mean, we have all these credentialed and certified teachers out there who are actually train wrecks. And so that doesn't make you a good teacher to have the credential. I've seen this a lot overseas. Everybody wants the credential. Nobody wants competence. It's like, what's the fastest path to get my credential? It's like, well, what's the best path to become competent? Mm-hmm. Those are two very different questions. And we play this credential game, and I'm sad to say, but many Christians are playing that game as well. Parents, well-meaning parents are nervous that their kids can't do X or Y because they don't have the credential. Well, I think that's just fundamentally a misguided aspiration. It's not enough to have a credential. We have a world full of credentialed people, and we have a world full of corruption and incompetence. And Christians need to rise above that, both in terms of their expectations, their standards. We need to have the integrity to do what is right and good, whether somebody gives us the credential or not. You've really seen that, I think, in the homeschooling and Christian schooling movements, because there you have parents who are like, I'm going to teach my kids the way they need to be taught, or we're going to teach at this school with standards of excellence, and we don't care whether the state likes it or not. We're going to do that. And they become some of the best schools in the land as a result. So we've already seen us overcome that bias against credentials in the sort of K to 12 area. We have not overcome it at the higher education level to this point. And the state controls, certainly every state I'm aware of controls the language. So if you want to offer a certificate, a diploma, a degree, a master's, a bachelor's, a PhD, the state actually says, we own those terms, and you must be approved by us if you're going to offer them. And so they've taken that high ground. But the spiritual warfare, the cultural warfare has been fought on higher education ground for a long time, and we've not done a good job of competing in that arena. And we've basically let secularists dictate the terms of the war and take that high ground, and we've kind of been caught unawares. I think there's a number of people who've done valiant work and tried to do what's right at a number of Christian institutions, but it's been too little, and we've not taken it seriously enough in the church. And I think we're paying the price now, especially since we pay our taxes for the statists to control that whole degree and credentialing game through the university system, which is overwhelmingly seculars.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole difference between credential and competency is something that has to be overcome. And I can't remember, I'm trying off the top of my head, I think it was in the book, The Art of Thinking Clearly. He brings out that anybody who gets an MBA and successful with that MBA didn't need that MBA to be successful. They would have been the ones that succeeded anyway without getting it, because MBAs are now so prevalent, like, everybody's getting them now, that they're not unique, that the ones who have them and are excelling are the ones that would have been excelling without them, because it is about competency and not credentialing. And we have made everything into, do you have the right credential? And I mean, I've seen that from my own experience about trying to hire employees in the past, where our policies in our company were they had to have certain types of degrees. And so we hired people with those degrees, and they were not successful. And then the people that we wanted to hire that didn't have them were doing the work successfully, but they didn't have the title and they didn't have the position. So it was one of those things where it has so influenced our culture and what we want to see happen. Thinking through this by partnering with businesses is to help them also see the benefit of this. And I've talked with many of our business partners that that's one of the things they're most excited about the Institute, is that they want competent students that they could hire or bring on, that they can train themselves and be able to develop the skills that they're looking for, not looking for just some type of degree or credential. So yeah, I think that is.
Yeah, I've told this story many times, but I had a friend who's a CEO of he's now retired, but a CEO of a very successful tech company. And he kept saying, Roy, I wish the students you had were trained in economics. I'd hire them. And I said, well, have you tried them? They were just liberal arts students, right? I said, but have you tried them? And he said, no. And I said, well, I challenge you to try them, because while they don't have the credential, what they have is a robust Christian worldview, a work ethic, and a desire to learn. And they're quick learners. Try them. Just try them. And he came back about, probably 5 years later, and he spoke to a group of students, and he said, I have to tell you, when Roy took me out behind the woodshed, I thought he was kind of crazy, but I thought, okay, well, I'll try and hire them. And when he did, he discovered that they were some of the best employees he ever had. Because he would go to the state university and say, okay, I need somebody with this degree in economics or this degree in statistics or something. And he would hire them, and then he'd find out that they were lazy, or that they really weren't that competent. They hadn't paid that close attention in their studies. They wanted all these benefits without having to work, et cetera, et cetera. And so he just was going through them, one after the other. And what the model was, go to the university, pick this replaceable part off the shelf, plug it into your business. If it works, great. If it doesn't, toss it and go hire another one. But that's not a Christian view of employment or HR or, raising up the next generation. That's just a factory model, an industrial model of mass production. And what he did was he hired students who didn't have that background, but he found that they were committed, they were creative. And he said, frankly, you all have made me a very rich man, because my business has thrived because of your work ethic and your diligence and your desire to learn and desire to do well. And what business doesn't want employees like that? I mean, if you just think about it in terms of from a Christian perspective, who doesn't want somebody who's hardworking, ethical, has integrity, and a real eager desire to learn and do better the next day? That's going to trump all the credentials in the world, ultimately, because that becomes its own credential. It becomes its own testimony of quality and integrity. So I do think that, we can say, well, credentials are important in certain venues, certain industries, certain jobs and businesses. You don't want to have a medical doctor who says, well, yeah, I read it online.
Right.
I know how to do this surgery. I saw a YouTube video. You don't like that, and that's completely understandable. At the same time, there are doctors who are quacks. There are lawyers who are ambulance chasers. They have the credentials, but they're unethical and not people you want to hire. So again, there's never a guarantee. This is a world filled with moral and spiritual landmines and potholes, and we have to be guarded and careful and wise. But so much of it is it's essential that we not sort of knee-jerk react to the status quo of the secular environment and say, well, my kid's got to get this credential. It's like, no, they don't. What they've got to get is competency. What they've got to get is a Christian worldview shaped by people who know how to do this work well, who also have a Christian worldview, so that they can submit all things to Christ, so that they can honor Christ in the work they do. And if they do that, then God actually promises that they will, stand before kings. They will be those who lead because of their competence. I mean, just think of Joseph in Egypt. He had the lowest ratings of credentials possible. He's a slave. He's a prisoner. He's a nobody, and he rises to the second in command in Egypt because of his faithfulness, because of his integrity, and that's what we want, I think, ultimately, with our children and our grandchildren, to be able to stand up with that kind of integrity and say, I serve the Lord. I do quality work because I'm doing it as unto God. I'm doing it to advance his kingdom. I'm doing it to honor my Lord and Savior in everything I do and say. That's the credential I want my employees, my coworkers, my children to have.
You recently taught a course for Cornerstone Work and Worldview Institute, Vocations Callings. Could you provide a summary of what you went over, what the course entailed? Just let us know a little bit about that course.
Sure. This class, I think, is one of the sort of the early foundational courses for the Institute, because what you really want to have students consider is the wide range of our sort of human callings and the vocations God has given us as sons and daughters, spouses, parents, citizens, church members, all these different things. And to help us clarify how we see ourselves in the world through the lens of both Scripture and the church. We're not just defined by our jobs or our careers. We're defined by much more biblically. And so we need to evaluate things like our individual gifts. God gifts us with different talents. We have different natural abilities. We have different affections. We have skills that we've acquired. You have skills different than my skills. And we also have very different goals. Certain things excite us. What are our affections? What do we love? When we get up in the morning, what do we just want to do? We just have to do this thing. Well, when we look at all of those things together, we have to not only ask, well, can I make a living at doing some of these things? But are they things that are strategic resources for the priorities of Christ's kingdom? Are there things that I can bring to the table that will be very helpful in the wider kingdom? Again, seeking first Christ's kingdom. we begin there, then a lot of the other things can kind of fall into place. I try to tell students that, you just take the work that God puts in front of you. I mean, I've done all kinds of crazy things. I've worked as a carpenter. I've worked in a hog factory, a hog plant in Iowa. I've picked blueberries. I've just done a lot of different things. And at every point, they added something to my experience, to my outlook, to my understanding of God's world, to the work world. And I am appreciative and treasure all of them. And it wasn't like I just had a career path. It's like, I want to be a university professor or something. That was not the case. That was, I had to kind of be pulled and dragged that direction. I didn't really want to go that way. But then people said, but you have a gift this way. You're doing well in this area. And so certain directions took me that way. So part of it was, encouraging students to think that the experiences they have now, which aren't great at a younger age, are still shaping and are formative to a long-term perspective that they cannot even see at this point. They don't see the end game. They don't see where they'll be in 20 years. But they might have a vision for where they'd like to be in 20 years, or the kinds of things they'd like to bring. And so we just talked a lot about the nature of work, the way God created us to work, the ways in which he's naturally oriented us towards certain kinds of things and not toward others. And I encourage the students to talk with parents, friends, family, about their own gifts and affections and callings. I asked them to evaluate that themselves. We sat down and sort of said, okay, what do you think you're good at and why? Where did that come from? We also talked about the different kinds of vocations that are out there, the skill requirements in some of the top vocations, and the ways in which, some of those things were extremely important as far as just shaping some of their own goals or imagining their own futures. We talked about sphere sovereignty, the idea that everything in God's world is under Christ. It's not always under the church, but it's under Christ. And so being a plumber or a carpenter or an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or a housewife, a mom, a dad, all of those things each have kingdom priorities. And those are part of your callings too, that you need to pay attention to. So moving us away from just the idea that this is a professional, careerist-oriented thing to saying, no, we're serving before the face of God, coram Deo, we're serving before the face of God in all these things. And we need to bring those gifts, skills, affections, vocations together in the world that we live in, including the world of work. And so at the end, we kind of looked at some of the skills and credentials that are required in the job market today for certain kinds of fields, and really encouraged them to just keep talking to people about these things and pursuing opportunities as they arise. So most of the students were fairly young, either late high school or just out of high school. So many of these things were in a sense fresh. But the same would be true to someone who's older, who's thinking about sort of retooling, or they're making a career change of some kind. They need to ask the same question because they have different levels of responsibilities and experiences. So those were all the range of things we kind of tried to cover in that class to help people think about their vocations and callings before God and how to serve him and make a living.
Were there any particular books or articles that you had them read to help them think through these things as well?
Yeah. We used Doug Sherman's book, Vocation Discerning Your Callings. It was published back, I think, in 2003 or so. Gene Edward Veith has written a book, God at Work, Christian Vocation, All of Life. It was published in 2011. Ed Veith is a good guy, Lutheran background, very, very helpful. Yeah, a number of books. Gordon Smith's Consider Your Calling, 6 Questions for Discerning Your Vocation. Os Guinness has a book on the call. And Michael Berg's very new book called Vocation, The Setting of Human Flourishing. All recent these recent books that are addressing, I think, this very important need. That's why there's a number of them out there. And we read a few articles and things as well. But I still think that one of the most important things, particularly for parents to do, is to sort of affirm with their children and their, relations, like if you have a son or grandson or something. So, talk with them about what do they like? Why do they like it? What do they want to do if they have free time? What do they use it for? What are they hoping to do? When they come home from work or school or whatever, what is the first thing they want to do besides eat? What do they want to do though? I mean, what's the kind of thing that gets them excited? They kind of yearn for this. And some of these things will be just the product of their immaturity, like I just want to go play or whatever. But, if you think about like, no, I want to go read, or I want to go build something, or I want to go do sports and be active and, be outdoors and so on. Well, those are not unimportant bits of information, right?
Right.
They tell you something about the deepest desires of the heart. And desires can be shaped. This is the other thing, is that we have a modern notion that, like you fall in love, it's like falling into a pool or something. No, love is something that is nurtured. I mean, Augustine was great about, this idea of shaping your loves. And we need to shape the affections of our children. And if you see their affections going a direction that they really shouldn't go, like I love playing video games, I just want to do it 24/7. Well, you need to shape their loves towards some other things too. I mean, it's not to say that that's bad by itself, but as a diet of eating sugar all day, not a good idea. So those things are elements you need to pay attention to, and you need to pay attention to them yourself. That's where the self-discipline comes in. How am I cultivating my own affections, my own desires, and can I shape those in a way that is really going to bless me and bless the kingdom, because I am exercising those gifts and interests and affections for the kingdom of God. So I think those are just things to keep, prodding our children, prodding ourselves to think about. And in a work and worldview institute, I think it's one of the most foundationally important questions to keep raising. I don't think you quit. You don't say, "Oh, I did that course." I think you keep coming back to it and say,
Right.
I got to keep asking this question.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. Well, I think those were the questions I had for you. So thank you for your time and answering those questions.
Pleasure. Always good chatting with you.
Thanks. I appreciate it.